Hey there, Curious Mind. We've got a truly fascinating deep dive ahead of us today. We're sifting through some pretty powerful claims, about global power, national sovereignty, and what one source describes as this like ongoing battle to reshape the world order. It's definitely a deep dive into a very specific and dramatic narrative. And our mission, like always, is just to help you understand the core ideas and, well, the intriguing details presented in the material you've shared with us. Today, our focus is on excerpts from an article titled 100 Trump Moves That Exposed, Destroyed, and Declassified the Globalist Machine. Quite a title. This piece was published July 28, 2025 by Era of Light, and the author is Medeea Greere. Now, this article, it wastes absolutely no time setting a really dramatic stage. It frames its content as nothing less than a declaration of war, that's the term it uses, against what it labels the New World Order. The author asserts that President Trump has unleashed over 100 direct strikes. And these are specifically designed, it says, to dismantle deep state networks, expose the globalist corruption, and, firmly reject international controls. It's certainly a provocative starting point. Okay, now, this is really vital for us to remember as we unpack this. Our role here is to objectively present the claims and perspectives found within this specific source material. Okay. We're here to understand what the article asserts and maybe how it builds its narrative. We're definitely not here to endorse or, take sides on the political viewpoints it expresses. Not at all. Our goal is simply to convey the ideas contained in the original source. That way you can grasp its unique lens on these events. Okay, let's unpack this then. Get ready for some pretty intense claims about how the world works, at least according to this one article. So the source kicks off making this overarching claim that President Trump has been actively fighting the New World Order since day one. And it frames these actions not as isolated policy decisions, but as ongoing warfare, alive, strategic, and still in motion. That's a direct quote.
Right. And what's truly fascinating here is how the source immediately positions these actions. It's not just policy shift, like you said. It's presented as a deliberate, continuous war against an established new world order. It sets this highly dramatic tone right away, using terms like strikes and dismantling operations against what it calls a globalist machine. So yeah, this framing sets up the entire piece as more of a battle chronicle than just a policy review.
Okay, so it dives right into its first category of claims then, dramatically titled Sovereignty Over Submission. It starts detailing actions it characterizes as a direct challenge to what it calls the open border cabal agenda and international influence. For instance, the article highlights things like implementing the Family Fraud Initiative to combat trafficking networks and disrupt globalist migration systems. That's one. Then there's proposing a U.S. takeover of Gaza, which the source claims challenges New World Order support for Israeli dominance. Also assigning U.S. Northern Command to secure borders, which the author describes as defying the open border cabal agenda, and imposing tariffs on Israel, which the text states leverage economic force against globalist aligned partners. And finally, sanctioning the ICC chief prosecutor, which the source says exposed judicial overreach. Quite a list to start.
Mm-hmm. And if we look at the broader narrative the source is painting, these early actions are all framed as these direct rejections of international or, globalist control, whether it's over national borders, legal systems, even foreign policy decisions. The article suggests they aim to destroy the elite's grip on sovereignty. Yeah. What's really striking is how the source takes these specific, perhaps standard policy actions and presents them as direct assaults on these larger, often kind of vaguely defined globalist migration systems or New World Order support. It reframes them from what might be seen as standard governmental actions to strategic moves in this larger war it describes.
Right, that's a really key point. So how does the article then connect these, seemingly quite different actions? You've got border security, tariffs on Israel. How does it connect them under this big umbrella of sovereignty over submission? What's the thread it wants us to see?
Well, the thread, as the source presents it, is this consistent reassertion of national power, national independence, against any perceived external or international influence. It argues that each one of these moves, regardless of maybe its more typical policy explanation, was actually a deliberate step to sort of claw back authority from what it views as this globalist machine trying to dictate national affairs. So it's about attributing this grander unified purpose to a whole variety of actions.
Okay, got it. So moving into the source's next section then, this is where the article claims Trump directly confronted major international bodies. It's under the heading Globalist Institutions in Flames. That title itself certainly implies a strong stance.
Yeah, and the article lists examples like withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. which it labels interestingly as rejecting environmental control schemes. Then there's exiting the World Health Organization, which the source describes as resisting international health governance. Also, restricting entry from high-risk countries and suspending the refugee resettlement program. The source ties that to targeting open border chaos and slamming demographic manipulation. Strong words there. It also mentions pressuring NATO allies to pay their fair share, characterized as challenging globalist military dependency, pulling out of the WHO pandemic treaty, which the source states was rejecting medical dictatorship, and finally promoting oil and gas independence, framed as breaking energy slavery.
Yeah, the language there is key, isn't it? In flames. From the source's perspective, that isn't just about withdrawal. It implies this aggressive, almost destructive intent. So the article frames these withdrawals and pressures not just as, say, policy shifts, but as actions deliberately designed to weaken or maybe even dismantle these international bodies. And by doing so, challenging what it calls internationalist frameworks and, as you said, medical dictatorship.
That term really stands out, rejecting medical dictatorship in relation to the WHO pandemic treaty. How does the article define that or support such a phrase in this context? What's it implying there?
Well, from the source's viewpoint, medical dictatorship seems to imply this kind of authoritarian international control over national health decisions, which it suggests the WHO pandemic treaty would have or could have enabled. So the article presents this withdrawal as a move to basically prevent any external body from dictating health policies within the U.S., thereby, protecting national sovereignty, specifically in public health matters. It's a very specific and, definitely a charged interpretation of these international agreements.
Okay, moving on, the next section is titled Foreign Policy with Teeth. Here, the source describes how Trump allegedly used various levers to disrupt what it sees as deep state tolerance and, again, globalist media narratives. It highlights examples like supporting Cuban dissidents. The source claims this defied deep state tolerance for communism. Also, using platforms like X to shatter globalist media narratives, sanctioning NGOs tied to globalist schemes, promoting domestic manufacturing to weaken global supply chain control, and opposing globalist vaccine mandates.
Right, so this category really highlights the source's assertion that foreign policy wasn't just about, traditional diplomacy. It was positioned as a tool to undermine perceived internal and external globalist influences. It connects actions like supporting dissidents directly to challenging a perceived deep state tolerance. And it positions the use of social media as this direct attack on what it labels globalist media narratives. So the article paints these as really calculated moves to assert national autonomy in areas often seen as, multilateral.
You mentioned the article says Trump used platforms like X to shatter globalist media narratives. What exactly does the source seem to imply by a globalist media narrative in this context? Does it define it?
It doesn't explicitly define it, no. But judging from the overall tone of the article, a globalist media narrative seems to refer to what the source perceives as this, unified, biased perspective, one promoted by mainstream media outlets that supposedly aligns with this New World Order agenda. So the use of platforms like X is framed as the direct counterattack, a way to bypass and ultimately shatter that established narrative. It's presented very much as a battle for information control.
Interesting. Okay, the article then makes a pretty dramatic claim in its next section. This one's titled, "The System is Collapsing." This part suggests that Trump's actions weren't just changing policy, but actively dismantling established structures, moving towards a breakdown of the existing order. It mentions specific actions like reducing U.S. funding to UNESCO, rejecting globalist digital currency plans, blocking UN peacekeeping funding, targeting big tech monopolies, rejecting UN sustainable development goals, and also expanding FBI operations against trafficking and strengthening state-level anti-trafficking laws. A real mix there.
Yeah, and according to the source, these diverse actions, everything from financial cuts to international bodies to domestic law enforcement expansion, they're all presented as part of this larger unified strategy. The goal, to make the system collapse. It portrays them as individual blows aimed at weakening various facets of what it perceives as globalist control. That includes technological, financial, and institutional structures. The article seems to draw a very, very direct line between these varied actions and this grand vision of a falling system.
Right. But does the article offer any explanation for how these actions specifically lead to a collapse, rather than just, a policy shift or maybe a change in U.S. priorities?
It mostly implies it. The idea seems to be that by systematically defunding, rejecting, and disrupting these various international and domestic mechanisms, which it labels globalist, the cumulative effect is a weakening and then eventually the collapse of the overall system they supposedly uphold. So it's presented as this strategic attack on the foundational pillars of this perceived globalist structure. The cause and effect isn't always, explicitly detailed with hard evidence. It's more asserted as the inherent outcome of these strikes.
Okay. Then we get to the final section titled The Final Push. The source describes this as the culmination of all these efforts, leading towards an ultimate victory against the globalist machine. And it gives examples like promoting U.S. agricultural independence, criticizing global financial institutions, rejecting AI global governance schemes, boosting rare earth mineral production, which it says counters global resource blackmail, also calling out Israeli influence in U.S. foreign policy, rejecting globalist education programs and globalist population control policies. And it concludes with this declaration. The United States bows to no global system.
Yeah, the source really culminates by stating that these 100 actions are not history, they're ongoing warfare, alive, strategic, and still in motion. And it asserts that Trump didn't join the system, he went in to destroy it. So the narrative here is just one of relentless assault on really every perceived aspect of the globalist machine, right up to things it calls population control policies. This final section really acts as a kind of reinforcing summary. It drives home the idea of a continuous total war, and it positions these actions as leading, inevitably, to a decisive victory.
That final statement is very declarative, isn't it? The United States bows to no global system. How does this final section, and especially that concluding line, reinforce the source's whole overarching narrative, the idea of a continuous war rather than just a set of completed policies?
Well, it really solidifies the idea that the war, in the source's view, is fundamentally about national sovereignty, independence, against any form, any shape of global control. By ending with such a bold declaration, the source isn't just listing past actions anymore. It's projecting this ongoing stance, right? A future where the U.S., under this kind of leadership, will remain defiant against any perceived global system. It frames the entire 100 points, the whole process, as this enduring struggle for supremacy, not just, shifts in policy.
Okay. So, pulling it all together, what does this all mean based on what we've just unpacked from this one article? What are the sort of key takeaways from the way it presents this narrative?
Well, the article clearly presents a comprehensive list of actions, but it consistently portrays them as President Trump's deliberate, sustained campaign to dismantle a new world order. And all its various components, international agreements, institutions, economic policies, social policies, you name it. The central argument really is that these actions constitute a declaration of war, and that Trump is actively winning this war, breaking this alleged machine. So I think the critical insight here is how the source consistently reframes standard political actions. It turns them into parts of this larger, almost conspiratorial war, transforming what could be policy analysis into this grand narrative of good versus evil. And it strategically groups these disparate actions under those dramatic headings to build a sense of an overarching unified campaign. And of course, it leaves us with that final, very provocative statement. The next chapter isn't about elections. It's about who writes the terms of reality. And we already know who holds the pen, which really underscores the narrative's underlying theme about power and control over reality itself.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate one last time, our deep dive today was about exploring this specific source's claims and trying to understand the dramatic narrative it constructs. We've laid out the details of what the article alleges, hopefully giving you a clear picture of its unique perspective on these events and, importantly, how it frames them. So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe consider this. In an era of, just abundant information, where powerful narratives claim to reveal hidden battles and secret agendas, how do you discern the difference between, say, a policy action and a declaration of war? How do these kinds of sweeping interpretations shape our understanding of current events? And I suppose, what does it tell us about the power of narrative itself? Something to think about. That's it for this deep dive into 100 Trump moves that exposed, destroyed, and declassified the globalist machine. We really hope this discussion has given you a clearer understanding of the claims made in this intriguing piece of source material.